Apache woman heals the cowboy, never knowing he would repay her with love that changed her life. The sun was beginning to dip behind the Rocky Mountains, casting long shadows over the dry desert landscape. The harsh wind swept through the open plains, carrying with it the scent of dust and earth. For most, the western frontier was a place of freedom, adventure, and opportunity. But for Jack, a weary cowboy traveling alone, it had become a place of struggle and pain. His boots were covered in dust, his clothes torn and worn from the long journey. His horse, a loyal steed named Dusty, had been his only companion through it all. Jack's journey had started with hope, ground in despair. He had set out to find a new life, a place where he could escape the demons of his past. But as days turned into weeks and weeks into months, the rough terrain and unpredictable dangers of the frontier began to take their toll. It was supposed to be an easy trip, a simple trade route through the desert. But then the outlaws had appeared. It happened fast. One minute Jack had been riding along the dusty trail, and the next he was surrounded by men on horseback, their faces hidden behind bandanas. They demanded everything. His money, his supplies, his weapons. Jack knew better than to argue, so he handed over what he could. But when they noticed his worn-out rifle and old gear, they decided to make an example of him. They struck him hard, knocking him off his horse. The pain was instant, a sharp burn spreading through his side as the men kicked him. His mind swirled with confusion, and blood seeped through his clothes. Before he could even try to stand, the outlaws had taken everything of value, including Dusty, his horse. Jack was left alone, barely conscious, lying on the hard earth with nothing but the dry wind and the fading light to keep him company. He knew he was in trouble. His side was torn open, and he could feel the blood draining from his body. His throat was dry, his lips cracked from thirst, and his vision blurred. In a desperate haze, Jack tried to push himself up, but his body wouldn't cooperate. He collapsed back to the ground, his body aching and his strength slipping away. Psst! The pain was unbearable, and every breath felt like it was his last. He realized with a grim sense of acceptance that he might not survive this. The outlaws had left him to die, and the desert had little mercy for the weak. Hours passed, and Jack's condition grew worse. His mouth was parched, and his thoughts became disjointed. He had been on his own for so long that he'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone care for him. The loneliness that had once been a comfort now felt suffocating. With no strength left to move, he simply lay there, staring up at the sky, hoping for some kind of miracle. Then, just when he thought it was over, he heard something. A soft, rhythmic sound of hooves. At first, he thought it was the wind playing tricks on him, but the sound grew closer. He tried to turn his head, but his body refused to obey. His eyes fluttered closed, and his thoughts began to drift. And then, he felt a presence beside him. A figure appeared through the dust, a shadow in the fading light. It was a woman, on horseback, her movements graceful and steady. Her long, dark hair flowed in the wind, and her eyes were sharp, filled with an intensity that seemed to see right through him. She was an Apache woman, dressed in simple yet strong clothes, and her face was painted with the marks of her people. She pulled her horse to a stop, dismounting quickly, as she knelt beside Jack, assessing his wounds with a practiced eye. Jack could barely keep his eyes open, but he could feel her hands on his body, gently moving him, checking his injuries. The touch was soft, yet firm, and it brought a sense of relief that he hadn't realized he was longing for.
The woman didn't say a word, but there was a sense of urgency in her movements.
She knew what had to be done. She tore a piece of cloth from her shawl and pressed it against Jack's bleeding side, trying to stop the flow of blood. Jack groaned in pain, but she didn't hesitate. Her hands were steady and her focus was unwavering as she worked to save him. As she worked, Jack tried to speak, but his voice came out in a rasp, barely a whisper. Water! He managed to croak, his throat so dry it felt like it was lined with sand. Without a word, the woman pulled a water skin from her belt and brought it to his lips. Jack drank eagerly, the cool liquid soothing his parched throat. For the first time in what felt like forever, he felt something other than pain.
The water gave him strength, enough to open his eyes and look at the woman who had saved him.
Her gaze was intense but kind, her eyes filled with something Jack couldn't quite place. It wasn't pity, nor was it the cold indifference that he had come to expect from strangers. No, there was something else in her eyes. Compassion, perhaps, and maybe, just maybe, something more. She spoke then, her voice low and steady.
"You're lucky I found you," she said in a language Jack didn't understand, though he could feel the meaning in her tone.
You would have died out here alone. Jack nodded weakly, trying to sit up but unable to do so. I was... breath. Just trying to make it through, he murmured, feeling the exhaustion weigh heavily on him.
I didn't expect this.
The woman didn't respond right away. Instead, she adjusted her position, making sure Jack was as comfortable as possible. Her hands moved over his injuries with practiced care, applying herbs and salves that Jack couldn't identify, but they soothed the pain, dulling it enough for him to relax. Earth. Jack's thoughts were cloudy, but one thing stood out clearly. This woman had saved him. She hadn't hesitated. She hadn't turned away. She had seen a stranger in need and had done what was necessary to help him. It was a kindness Jack had almost forgotten existed in the world. As the night fell, Jack's pain began to ease, and his body slowly began to relax. The woman made a small camp nearby, building a fire with ease, and for the first time in days, Jack felt a sense of warmth. Not just from the fire, but from the care she had shown him. Perhaps he didn't know her name yet, but he could sense that she was someone who lived a life far different from his own. As the fire crackled in the quiet night, Jack drifted into a restless sleep, his body still weak but now alive with the hope that he had been given another chance. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while he felt like he might just have a future worth living for. The morning light pierced through the cracks in the desert, casting a soft glow over the camp. Jack stirred slowly, feeling the warmth of the fire and the sensation of cool morning air on his face. He opened his eyes, blinking against the brightness, and tried to move, but his body felt stiff and sore. His wounds throbbed, but the pain was much more manageable now, thanks to the care the woman had given him the night before. Ayanna was tending to the fire, her movements graceful as she added more wood. She hadn't spoken much since she'd found him, but Jack noticed that she had a calm presence, one that made him feel safe despite the unfamiliar surroundings. The desert was a harsh place, but there was something about the way she moved that made it seem less threatening. Jack tried to sit up, wincing as his muscles protested. He gritted his teeth, feeling a sharp pain in his side, but he managed to prop himself up with one arm. He took in his surroundings, the fire, the small shelter she had built, and the endless stretch of desert around them. He had no idea where he was, but he was grateful to be alive. Ayanna looked over her shoulder, noticing Jack's effort to rise. She walked over to him, her steps light, and knelt down beside him. Her eyes were focused on his face, reading him carefully. "You should rest," she said, her voice soft but firm. Jack swallowed, trying to clear his throat. I'm fine, he said, though the words came out weaker than he intended. He wasn't fine. He was still in pain, his body still weak from the ordeal. But something inside him pushed him to get up, to show that he was strong enough to take care of himself. It was a cowboy's pride, one that had kept him going through many difficult situations. Ayana didn't argue. She handed him a bowl of something warm, and Jack took it gratefully. The broth was rich and soothing, the flavors unfamiliar but comforting. Thank you," he said quietly as he drank, his voice hoarse. She nodded but didn't say anything at first. Instead, she took a seat across from him by the fire, her gaze steady as she watched him.
Jack wasn't sure what to make of her silence, but he knew one thing for sure: she had saved him.
Breath. She had taken him in without hesitation, and now she was tending to his wounds like he was someone important, someone worth saving. When he finished the broth, he put the bowl aside and turned to her.
"I don't know how to repay you," he said, his voice sincere. He had always been a man of action, someone who didn't rely on others.
But in this moment, he knew he owed her everything. She had brought him back from the edge of death. "You saved my life!" Ayana didn't look surprised by his gratitude, but there was a softness in her eyes that Jack hadn't expected. "I did what was needed," she said simply, as if it was nothing extraordinary. "It is my way," rasp.
Jack studied her for a moment. Her words were humble, but he could tell there was much more to her than just a healer.
She was strong, independent, and lived in a world where survival was everything. He didn't know her story, but he wanted to. He needed to understand more about the woman who had shown him such kindness despite the risks. "I don't know who you are, but—" "I owe you my life," he said, his voice stronger now, though still raspy. "I'm not sure how to say it, but I won't forget this. I'll do whatever I can to repay you." Ayana looked at him thoughtfully, her expression unreadable. For a moment, Jack thought she might brush off his gratitude, but instead she spoke. "There is no need for repayment," she said, her voice calm yet firm. "The desert has a way of taking from us all." "I only gave you what was needed to survive." Jack frowned, sensing there was more to her words than she was letting on. He had known plenty of people in his life who would have demanded something in return, but Ayana wasn't like that. She wasn't asking for anything. She was simply offering help, as if it was her duty. "But I want to help you," Jack insisted. "You've done so much for me already. I have to do something in return." "Whatever you need, I'll do it." Ayana's gaze softened, but she shook her head slightly. "You will not repay me," she said. "Your survival is enough."
There was a quiet strength in her words, a wisdom that Jack didn't fully understand but couldn't deny.
It made him feel even more grateful. He had been alone for so long, wandering without purpose, and now someone had given him not only a chance at life but also a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. He took a deep breath, trying to understand her perspective. "I don't know how to thank you for this," he said, his voice quieter now. "But I can't just leave without doing something. Is there anything—" "Anything at all?" Ayana paused, her eyes thoughtful. For a long moment she didn't speak. Jack wasn't sure if she was considering his words or if she was simply lost in her own thoughts. Finally she spoke again, her voice softer now. "You may stay for as long as you need," she said. "I will not turn you away." Jack looked at her with a mixture of relief and gratitude. He wasn't sure where he was going next or what the future held. But, at least for now, he had a place to rest, to heal. The thought of staying in the desert, alone once more, was overwhelming. Ayana's offer gave him something he hadn't had in a long time, a sense of belonging. "I'll take you up on that," Jack said, his voice steady. "I'll stay." Over the next few days, Jack focused on recovering, and Ayana kept him busy with small tasks around the camp. At first, he didn't feel strong enough to do much, but Ayana's presence made it easier to push through the pain. As Jack helped with the chores, he couldn't help but notice how at ease she seemed in the desert, where she moved through it like someone who belonged. Someone who had always lived in this harsh land. She knew how to gather food, make fire, and heal. Jack watched her with quiet admiration. Though they didn't speak much, Jack could sense there was a quiet understanding between them. Ayana's actions spoke louder than any words could, and Jack began to feel the weight of his gratitude grow heavier. He wasn't just grateful for her help. He was moved by her strength and resilience. But there was something else, something deeper that Jack couldn't quite explain. It was a feeling he hadn't experienced in years, a connection.
There was something about Ayana that drew him in, something beyond her kindness or the fact that she had saved his life.
There was a quiet beauty in the way she lived, in the way she handled herself. Jack couldn't help but feel that he was falling for her, though he didn't have the words to explain it. As the days passed, Jack grew stronger. Bonnie. His wounds began to heal, and he felt the strength returning to his body. But as much as he wanted to get back on his feet, he found himself lingering. There was something about Ayana's presence that kept him from leaving. Perhaps it was the peace he felt with her, the comfort of her quiet strength. Or perhaps in some small way he knew that staying here in the desert with her was a chance for a new beginning. As the days turned into weeks, Jack found himself growing stronger. His body, though still marked by the scars of his injuries, began to regain its former strength. The pain that had once been a constant companion gradually faded, replaced by the soothing feeling of healing breaths. Every day Ayana tended to him with the same quiet care, tending to his wounds, offering him food, and giving him the strength to rise each morning.
In the beginning, Jack had focused only on getting better, on the immediate need to recover from his near-death experience.
But as the days passed, he began to realize something deeper was happening, something he hadn't expected. He was no longer just grateful for Ayana's help. He was beginning to admire her in ways he couldn't explain. She was unlike anyone he had ever met. Her strength was evident in everything she did, from the way she carried herself with quiet confidence to the way she moved through the desert like it was her home. Jack, who had always thought of himself as a rugged individual, found himself in awe of her independence. She didn't need anyone, and yet here she was, helping a stranger without expecting anything in return. Their days together were simple. The mornings were spent with Ayana preparing the camp, gathering what they needed from the desert, and ensuring they had enough water and food to survive. Jack, now recovered enough to help, spent his days working alongside her. They fixed up the shelter, gathered firewood, and helped each other with the small tasks of survival. But it wasn't just the work that began to connect them. It was the quiet moments in between, the moments when they didn't speak but understood each other completely. Jack would watch as Ayana worked, admiring the ease with which she handled everything. Her movements were fluid, graceful, yet filled with purpose. There was something about the way she lived that made everything seem so much simpler. The harshness of the desert, the loneliness, the dangers, it all seemed less daunting when she was around. One evening as the sun set and the desert air grew cooler, Jack sat by the fire, watching the flames dance. Ayana was sitting across from him, silently tending to the fire, her face illuminated by the soft glow. Jack had noticed that, even in the quietest moments, she never seemed lonely. She had a calmness about her that Jack envied. He had always struggled with silence, with the long hours spent alone, but she seemed at peace with it. They had talked little about their pasts. Ayana had shared little, and Jack didn't press her for details. He knew she was a woman of few words, and he respected that. But as the days passed, Jack found himself wanting to know more about her. Who was she? What had brought her to this place? What had shaped her into the strong, independent woman she was now? One evening as they sat together, Jack couldn't help himself. The silence between them felt heavier than usual, and he needed to know more. "Ayanna," he began, his voice low and hesitant. "How did you end up here, alone in the desert?" Ayanna looked up at him, her expression unreadable. For a long moment she didn't speak. Jack wondered if she would brush off his question, as she had done before. But to his surprise, she spoke softly, her words carrying the weight of something deeper, something personal. "I was born here," she said simply, "in this desert, among my people." Death. I was raised to survive in the harshest of conditions, to live in a world that doesn't always offer kindness. My family taught me how to heal, how to respect the land, and how to survive when everything seems against you. Jack listened intently, his eyes fixed on her face as she spoke. There was a strength in her voice, but also a sadness. He could sense that there was more to her story, but he didn't want to push her. Ayanna wasn't someone who shared her emotions easily, and Jack understood that. Breaths. "I left my people when I was older," she continued, her gaze drifting away from Jack, as if she was seeing something far off. "I needed to find my own path. Right. The desert is vast, and I wanted to see more of it, but I also knew that I would always be drawn back to this place. The desert calls to me in a way nothing else does." Jack nodded, his heart heavy with understanding. He could relate to that feeling. The pull of the land, the need to carve out one's own place in the world. He had spent much of his life searching for something, trying to outrun the ghosts of his past. He had never found what he was looking for, but sitting here with Ayanna in the quiet of the desert, he felt like he was closer than ever to finding peace.
"I understand," Jack said quietly.
"I've spent most of my life looking for something too. I never quite knew what it was, but I thought if I kept moving, I would eventually find it." Breath. Ayanna turned her gaze back to him, her eyes meeting his with a quiet intensity. For a moment, Jack thought she might say something more, but she didn't. Instead, she simply nodded, as if acknowledging the truth of his words. The days that followed felt different. There was an unspoken understanding between them now, something that went beyond words. Jack began to notice small things. How Ayanna would always make sure he had enough water, how she would quietly watch over him when he slept, as if she were always keeping him safe. It wasn't that she was trying to control him or shelter him. It was that she cared in a way that was deep and unspoken. Jack, in turn, began to open up more. He had always been a man of few words, but with Ayanna, he felt comfortable in silence. They didn't need to talk all the time. Just being together, sharing the same space, was enough. One afternoon, as they sat by the fire after a long day's work, Jack found himself watching Ayanna more than usual. But she had always been beautiful to him. But it wasn't just her physical appearance that drew him in. It was the way she carried herself, the quiet strength she exuded, the way she seemed to belong to the desert in a way he never would. He couldn't help but feel drawn to her, and though he didn't know how to express it, he knew that his feelings for her were growing deeper. He admired her, yes, but it was more than that. There was something in him that longed to protect her, to show her that he could be more than just the cowboy who had been saved. But Jack held back. He knew that Ayanna wasn't the type of woman to be easily won over. She was strong, independent, and had her own path to follow. He didn't want to rush things, didn't want to make her feel like she owed him anything. But still, as the days passed, the feeling in his heart grew stronger. As the sun set on another quiet evening, Jack realized that he was no longer just a man trying to survive. He was a man who had found something worth fighting for, something worth holding on to, and though he didn't yet know what the future held, he knew that he wanted to share it with Ayana. The days had grown longer, and the desert sun now rested lower in the sky, casting an orange glow across the land.
Jack had settled into a new rhythm of life with Ayana.
The days no longer felt like a blur of survival and exhaustion. Instead, they were filled with a quiet sense of purpose. Jack had found himself enjoying the simplicity of their routine, gathering firewood, helping Ayana with her tasks, and even sitting together in the stillness of the desert evenings. There was a peace in it that he hadn't known for years. But even as the days grew peaceful, Jack knew there was something deeper stirring within him. He had grown fond of Ayana, more than he had expected to. It wasn't just gratitude anymore. It wasn't just the healing of his wounds that made him admire her. It was the way she lived, her quiet strength, and the calm that seemed to radiate from her. He admired her independence, her connection to the land, and the way she seemed to carry herself with dignity no matter the situation. He had always been a man who prided himself on his self-sufficiency, but he couldn't deny that something about Ayana had begun to make him feel more alive. The feelings he had for her were growing each day, though he hadn't fully admitted it to himself yet.
He didn't know if she felt the same way, and he wasn't sure if he should even hope for it. After all, she had helped him when he was at his lowest, and now he felt like he was standing on his own again.
But still, there was something pulling him toward her. One evening, as the sun began its descent, Jack and Ayana sat by the fire, the heat of the flames mingling with the cool desert air. The crackling of the fire was the only sound between them, and for a long time, neither of them spoke. Jack's mind was racing, his thoughts tangled up in emotions he couldn't easily understand. Breath. He had spent so much time alone in his life, wandering from place to place, never really feeling connected to anyone. But now, sitting here with Ayana, he felt a connection to something real and grounding. He looked at her, her face illuminated by the firelight, her features soft yet strong. She was focused on the fire, her eyes reflecting the flames as she gently stirred the embers. Her presence was calming. But there was a tension in the air tonight, something unspoken that Jack couldn't ignore any longer. "Ayana," Jack said quietly, breaking the silence. His voice was soft, yet it carried the weight of everything he had been feeling. She turned her head slightly, her eyes meeting his with a steady gaze. "Yes," she replied, her voice calm, as always. Jack took a deep breath, his heart pounding. He wasn't sure why it was so difficult to find the right words. After all, he had been speaking to her for days, sharing simple conversations, exchanging small details about life. But this was different. This was about something deeper, something he couldn't just ignore any longer. Birth. I don't know how to say this, Jack began, his words stumbling out. But I've been thinking about everything. About you. About what you've done for me. You've saved my life, Ayana.
More than once, really. But it's more than that.
It's how you live, how you make this desert seem like home. You've shown me a kind of strength I didn't even know I was looking for. Ayana remained silent, her eyes fixed on him. There was no judgment in her gaze, only a quiet attentiveness that made Jack feel like his words mattered. Inspiration. He swallowed hard, trying to steady himself.
I'm not sure how to say it, but I'm grateful for you.
For everything you've done. And I don't just mean for healing me. It's more than that. It's... He paused, unsure how to continue. Ayana's gaze softened, and she slowly leaned forward, closing the space between them. Her presence was warm, steady, and Jack could feel the pulse of her calmness. It was comforting, but it also made his heart race. "Jack," she said, her voice gentle, "you don't need to say anything."
I know what you mean. I have seen it in your eyes.
Jack blinked, surprised. How could she know? How could she have seen what he hadn't fully admitted to himself? He opened his mouth to speak, but the words stuck in his throat.
Ayana smiled softly. It's not just about the things we say.
Sometimes it's the things we don't say that matter most. You've been here, helping me, sharing these days with me. Psh. You've been honest, and that honesty is more than enough. Jack's heart skipped a beat at her words. He hadn't expected her to respond this way. He had feared that his feelings might drive a wedge between them. But instead it seemed like she understood. Perhaps she had felt the same way all along, but had simply chosen not to speak of it. Or maybe, like him, she had been afraid of what it meant. For a long moment, they simply sat in the quiet, watching the fire flicker and dance. Jack's mind was racing, but there was a deep calm in his chest now. Ayana had given him something he hadn't known he needed. Understanding. She didn't need to say much to make him feel seen, to make him feel like he wasn't alone in this. She had shown him that their bond was more than just two people sharing space. It was something deeper, something real. Finally, Jack spoke again, his voice quieter this time, but filled with certainty. I think I've been running from something my whole life. I've been looking for something out there. He gestured vaguely toward the desert. But I never knew it was right here. He turned to face her fully, his eyes locking with hers.
I've found something, Ayana. Something I never expected.
It's you. Ayana's gaze softened even more, and she reached out, her hand resting gently on his. The touch was light but filled with meaning.
You don't need to run anymore, Jack, she said quietly. You found your place just like I have. Jack felt a surge of emotions he had long buried deep inside.
There was relief, yes, but also something else. A sense of belonging.
He had never imagined that he could find that here, in the desert, with a woman whose life was so different from his.
Breath. Yet here he was, feeling more at home than he had ever felt before. He took a deep breath, the weight of his thoughts finally settling into something solid. I don't know what the future holds, but I know I want to face it with you. Ayana's eyes met his, and for the first time there was a vulnerability in her gaze that Jack hadn't seen before. She had always been strong, composed, and yet now, in this quiet moment, he saw the same depth of feeling in her that he felt in himself.
I want that too, she said, her voice barely above a whisper.
But we must take it one step at a time. The desert has a way of testing us, and so does life. But with each other, we will face whatever comes. Jack nodded, feeling the weight of her words. There was no need for grand gestures, no need for promises that couldn't be kept. What mattered was that in this moment, they had both found something they hadn't expected, but something worth holding on to. As the fire crackled between them, Jack felt a sense of peace that he hadn't known for years. The desert, once a place of loneliness and hardship, now felt like a place of possibility. And with Ayana by his side, he knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. The days had begun to blend together in the way they always did when life was simple, but there was nothing ordinary about the life Jack was living now. The desert, which had once been a lonely, unforgiving place, had become a home, a place of peace and quiet. And at the center of that peace was Ayana. Over the weeks and months they had spent together, Jack had realized that she wasn't just someone who had saved his life. She had changed it in ways he couldn't quite put into words. Their mornings were often quiet, filled with the gentle rhythms of desert life. Ayana would rise before the sun, as was her habit, and start a small fire while Jack slowly awoke. By the time the sun rose, they would already be at work, gathering what they needed for the day: water from the desert springs, herbs, and anything else that could be found in the vastness around them. Breath. There was something grounding in the simplicity of these tasks, something that made Jack feel connected to the land in a way he had never imagined possible. Jack had always thought of himself as a solitary man, someone who didn't need others to survive. He had spent so many years alone that he had convinced himself it was better that way. But Ayanna had shown him a different way of living, one where people could rely on each other, help one another, and share in the hardships and joys of life. It was a kind of strength he hadn't understood until now. And more than anything, it was a kind of love that Jack had never known before. As the seasons changed, Jack and Ayanna's bond grew deeper. There was no grand confession, no dramatic declarations of love. Instead, their relationship blossomed in the quiet moments, the moments when their eyes met across the fire, when they shared a meal in silence, when their hands brushed as they worked together. It was in these small, everyday things that Jack came to realize the depth of his feelings for Ayanna.
There were still moments of doubt, of course.
Jack sometimes found himself questioning whether Ayanna truly felt the same way. She was strong, independent, and so much more at peace with herself than he was. There was a part of him that feared she might one day leave him, just as he had left so many places in the past. But every time those doubts crept into his mind, Ayanna would do something that reminded him she was there, something simple, like bringing him a cup of tea or touching his arm as they passed by one another. Her actions, so quiet yet so full of meaning, reassured him that their bond was real. One evening after a long day of work, they sat by the fire, the warm glow casting shadows on the desert around them. The air was cool, and a light breeze rustled the trees nearby. Jack found himself looking at Ayanna, his thoughts swirling with emotions he hadn't quite figured out how to express. "Ayanna," he said, his voice quiet but full of meaning. "Do you ever think about the future? About what comes next?" She turned her gaze toward him, her eyes soft but knowing. There was something about the way she looked at him, as if she understood exactly what he was asking without him needing to say it out loud.
I think about it, she said, her voice calm and steady, but I don't think about it the way others do.
I've learned to live with the flow of things, to trust in the present moment. The future will come, just as the desert changes with the seasons. But what matters is what we do right now. Jack nodded, his heart swelling with a mix of relief and admiration. Ayanna had always been so grounded, so certain in her own way. He admired that about her, how she didn't seem to need more than the life she had, how she had made peace with everything the world had given her. It was something Jack had struggled with for years, and now being with her, he was beginning to understand that peace could be found right here, in the present. I've never known peace like this, Jack said softly. I've spent my whole life searching for something I couldn't even name, and now I realize it's been here all along. With you. Narration. Ayanna's expression softened, and she reached out to touch his hand, a simple gesture that held more meaning than words ever could. I feel the same, she said quietly. When I found you, I didn't know what it would mean. I didn't know that we would find something in each other. But I do know that this feels right. The fire crackled between them, and for a long time neither of them spoke. There was no need for words anymore. They had found something in each other, something real, something deep, and it was enough. Round. In despair, as the months passed, their lives continued in their quiet rhythm. They worked together, lived together, and shared the beauty of the desert in ways that Jack had never imagined possible. The desert, which had once been a symbol of hardship and loneliness, had become a place of renewal and growth. Jack was no longer the man he had been when he first arrived, broken, alone, and searching for something he could never find. With Ayanna by his side, he had found a peace that went beyond survival. He had found love, and it was transforming him in ways he had never expected. One morning as the sun rose over the desert, Jack found himself standing beside Ayana, watching the light spread across the land. The air was still cool, the sky clear and bright. Ayana had been his guide, his healer, and his companion, but now, as he stood beside her, he realized that she had also become his family, his home. "I don't want to be anywhere else," Jack said, his voice steady with conviction. This is where I'm meant to be."
"With you." Ayana turned to him, her eyes reflecting the soft light of the dawn.
"Psh," she smiled, a small but powerful gesture that made Jack's heart swell with emotion. "I've always known that we were meant to find each other," she said softly. Rasp. "I just didn't know how." Jack reached for her hand, his fingers brushing against hers. They stood there together, side by side, as the desert stretched out before them, vast and timeless. In that moment, Jack knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, no matter what the future held, they would face it together. The love they had found in each other was more than enough. It was everything. And so, in the quiet beauty of the desert, amidst the stillness of the land that had once seemed so empty, Jack and Ayana had built something stronger than survival. They had built a life, a love that would last. The cowboy and the Apache woman, brought together by fate and bound by their shared journey, had found the greatest treasure of all, the peace of knowing they were home.